Hello everyone, I'm about to introduce you to one of the most underrated RTS that's been buried underneath the sands of time from the year 2001. The game presents a very unique concept of gameplay that was ahead of its time, and it hasn't been replicated in any other RTS. So let's dive in and explore this concept. The game is World War III Black Gold. World War III Black Gold, or World War III for short, can be found on Steam for a small price of $5. All soundtracks in this video is from the game. World War III does have campaign missions, but that's not the focus of this video. Rather, this video is here to showcase you the glory of its multiplayer and skirmish experience. World War III is pretty tactical, so there is a little bit of a learning curve that can be hard for new players. In this video, I'll explain everything you need to know to understand the concept of this game and to help overcome that learning curve. To get a good idea of this concept, consider the setting of this game. The setting is one where resources are scarce and everything is expensive. The resource mentioned is oil, and they deplete pretty quickly. It's important to fight over the oil fields, or at least prevent your enemy from controlling them. You can, before the start of the game, set the quantity of the oil fields to high, so it takes much longer to deplete. However, that will kind of break the game and you'll never need to leave your base. The way a game will look during its late stages will have the player left with no purchasing power and only the units that they carefully and thoughtfully researched and purchased. For example, 2 heavy tanks, 4 light tanks, and 7 jeeps, just to give you a picture. World War III is less chaotic like other RTSs where swarms of units from all sides are fighting each other endlessly, and is more comparable to a game of chess where the mere placement of your scarce units is extremely tactical. There are only 2 production buildings in the game, the landing zone for lighter units and the airport for heavier units. There are many units to be purchased from both buildings, but they can only produce 1 unit at a time. If you purchase 2 landing zones, only 1 can remain active, so you cannot produce units any faster. Same goes for airports. That's why it's important not to throw all your units away into retreat if you're taking casualties, because it'll take some time to make them all back, leaving you vulnerable. It is also important to know which unit you want to spend time producing. The last thing you want is to produce a bunch of units that are going to be useless in your current situation. But before you can produce anything, you need to research it first. At the very start of the game, the only unit you'll have access to is the Jeep. If you want to produce tanks, you need to research them. Same with attack helicopters, artillery, defensive structures, upgrades, and super weapons. You can find a list of everything you can research in the technology tree. The only catch is, all technologies are expensive. They each take roughly 5 minutes to complete, and you can only research 1 tech at a time. So there will be critical decision making that you will be making from the start of the game. You can change the research speed before the game starts, but again, that'll kind of break the game. In addition of being time consuming and costly, there are things you must research before researching others. For example, if you want to be able to produce the heavy tank, you must first research the light tank before researching the heavy tank before being able to even produce it. And after that, they are so expensive that you'll probably only be making 4 of them in total before the map runs out of oil. But really, 4 tanks are plenty in this game. With that said, you won't have the time nor the resources to research all the tech in the game, so if you decide on the tank route, you might miss out on the helicopters or artillery, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It depends on your playstyle, strategy, and the way your opponent is playing. Personally, I like to stop my tank research at the light tank and then go into heavy helicopters. After some time has passed during a game, the sun will go down and the lights will turn on. But it's not just for aesthetics. The darkness of the night changes how the game is played. At night, you can command your units to turn off their lights. This will make their movement speed painfully slow, but in return, they become very stealthy. The enemy won't be able to see your units unless they get up really close to them. Buildings do not become stealthy during the night, so you can strike your opponent's buildings while they're left to guess where your units are. The best way to counter this is to send out a pawn to locate the enemies, so that your defense structures can attack them. If you find yourself outmatched on the battlefield, you can keep your stronger units in the dark and use your more expendable units to locate powerful targets. Even if outnumbered, you can wipe out a group of tanks while they're unable to find you. But if you find yourself in such a position, it's best to turn on your lights for speed and fall back ASAP. After all, your resources are limited. All units carry ammunition, and they can run out. Some types of units carry more ammo than others. When a unit runs out of ammo, it's unable to defend itself and needs to be resupplied. This happens at the supply center, which comes with a resupply helicopter. Once a unit is running low on ammo, the resupply helicopter automatically picks up ammo and journey its way to the units in need of resupply. If you notice your enemy running out of ammo, you can try to intercept the supply helicopter and destroy it. the enemy will have to make a new one. Okay, so we established half of the concept of the game. Everything is scarce, everything takes time, you need to choose wisely what to research and in which order, and the dark is very scary. The other half of the game's concept is how the combat works. We'll understand it by looking at the units and the roles that they play, starting with the Jeep. The Jeep, or Humvee, is the cheapest unit in the game. They are armed with a machine gun which can attack air targets. Being quick and cheap, they play the role of the pawn. They're used for hit and runs and scouting for the enemy positions in the dark. They are mixed in with the light tank to help deal and absorb some of the damage. Which brings me to the next unit, the light tank. The light tank is one of the first things available to research, and it plays the role of the backbone of the front line. It takes 5 to 6 jeeps to take down one of these bad boys. In addition to their long-range cannon, they're equipped with a machine gun like the Jeep, also giving them some anti-air capabilities. What makes these guys versatile on the battlefield is their high health, their high damage, and their ability to travel on the water, which is perfect for taking shortcuts, tactical retreats, launching surprise attacks, and my absolute favorite, the water maps. Most of the ground fighting happens between these tanks mixed with some jeeps for support, but they cost more than double a jeep and takes much longer to produce. So it's best to keep them in the back or on the water out of reach while the jeeps locate targets for them. But if you try scouting with your light tanks, by the time you find your enemies, it'll be too late. After having researched the light tank, you can research the heavy tank. And you will love the heavy tanks. They are literally invincible. Well, not completely, but they are immune to most attacks. Jeeps, light tanks, artillery, most helicopters cannot harm the heavy tank. Their only flaw is, they run out of ammo pretty quickly. So if you're using heavy tanks, only use them to destroy the enemy's units. Then bring in your light tanks and leave the base destruction to them. So how do you destroy a heavy tank? There are ways, but not many. Including other heavy tanks, some helicopters, and the anti-tank cannon defensive structure. There are a few more less common ways, but I'll just stop it there to keep it short. Next is the attack helicopters. There are mainly two kinds, light and heavy, and they are identical to each other except that the heavy helicopters have more health, damage, and they come with flares to deflect missile attacks, but they only carry enough flares to dodge an ambush or two before they run out, like ammunition. But helicopters are a bit more complicated than that. After doing more research, both light and heavy helicopters have just about 3 variants. The standard machine gun helicopter, which can also attack other helicopters, the long-range rocket barrage helicopter, which can attack outside of the range of anti-air replacements, and the anti-tank missile helicopter, which can destroy heavy tanks. I'll expand more about them in a separate video, but for now, that's it for helicopters. Lastly, we have the artillery, a heavy and light variant. There's not much to expand on them except that they run out of ammo pretty quickly, but they're perfect for taking out enemy buildings and defensive structures. But I'll note that the heavy artillery has a much longer range and is also one of the few things that could damage a heavy tank. We're just about done. I'll go over the 3 factions very briefly, but before I do that, there are 2 notable structures worth mentioning, the anti-tank cannon and radar. The anti-tank cannon is self-explanatory, but it's important to note that it's one of the first things you can research, so if you don't plan on going into tanks, yet you fear encountering enemy tanks, you can start the game with researching the anti-tank cannon to ensure that you can repel them. They can't attack what's behind them, so be mindful of where you put them. Heavy tanks are fast enough to pass them without dying. Now, the most important tech of the game, the radar. Remember that problem of not being able to see your enemy in the dark? Well, the radar solves that. Once you place a radar on the field, you can see everything in its range, hidden or not. However, artillery can fire outside the range of radars, so you have to rely on other methods to locate them. And lastly, we have 3 factions, the USA, Russia, and Iraq. The factions are pretty much identical to each other, except that they have some unique tech, making them feel different enough to offer different experiences. For example, the US is very heavy and fancy, while Russia has chemical weapons and their units self-repair. And Iraq has inexpensive ways to deal damage to heavy tanks, including kamikaze units. I'll make videos explaining each faction, but now it's time to end the video. To conclude, World War III Black Gold is unique. It focuses on being ultra-realistic, like with the day and night cycles, and how bullets cannot harm heavy tanks. All the units are named and designed after the real thing, like the Russian BTR and the US M1 Abrams. I think because of the sloped learning curve, people gave up on it too quickly, but hopefully people will notice it for what it was and appreciate all the thought and heart that was put into it by its creators. Sadly, there is no online multiplayer. Steam doesn't support it, neither does Game Ranger. But if you have siblings, or some friends who are interested, you could hook up some computers together with LAN cables and play that way. But if not, for $5, it's still pretty fun to play against the AI until it's no longer challenging. There is a complicated reach-around way to get the online multiplayer working, but that'll be in a separate video as well. So, what do you think about World War III? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.